Welcome back to the Move Daily Health Podcast. I'm Dane Wallace, here again with Freya Spence, and welcome to Season 3. We've taken a tiny little hiatus. You know, life, it happens, and I'm sure we'll get into that over the course of this season. And we're going to be doing a little bit of a mix between Season 1 and Season 2, where we'll have a few episodes, just the two of us. And in other episodes, we'll bring on some researchers to touch base on some of the latest in health research, basically. All right. And as always, you can find us at movewelldaily.com or on Instagram at move_daily_EDS. So in today's episode, we're going to do a little bit of a recap on our 5 pillars of health. As you guys know, we are health coaches. Podcasts aren't the only thing that we do. And so our entire practice is built around these 5 pillars. So we're going to start with movement and nutrition, as these are the two big rocks that everyone really reaches out to first before getting onto the other threes of self, community, and stillness.
Brilliant. So we've touched on the pillars before in written format and then also in our podcast. So anybody who's listened to previous seasons will know that we've done sort of a recap of that. But we think that when your, well, they are pillars, so when your foundations are set up in this way, it is worthwhile to check in on them. And in this, we will be discussing what it is, again, what the pillar is, why it's important, and then going through what we have learned or how our understanding of that pillar has sort of changed or evolved as we continue to work with people, and then what you can do to check in on that pillar yourself in your own life, or perhaps what you can do to improve upon it or spend more time with it. So when it comes to movement is essentially one of our organism's expectations. So what I mean by that is when you are born, you expect, your system expects to encounter things like oxygen. You know, that's your your lungs' expectations are to encounter oxygen and have it readily available to you at all times. So in light of that, our organism's other expectation is movement. And movement is something that we delineate from exercise, even though it does include exercise. So when we're exercising, of course, we are moving, but we move all of the time. As you can see, Dane fidgets constantly. That's a form of movement. Meaning that there's a lot more than just structured exercise. And honestly, our body doesn't come into the world expecting structured exercise. That is something that we do to combat the more sedentary lifestyle that's quite frankly, very easy to adopt in our current or modern society, because most of our jobs do require a significant amount of time being spent in static postures. Static postures, positions, whether it's chairs or driving, or which is another form of chair, or static standing. Yeah, it's like we have all these different kinds of seated positions that occur throughout our days, and so we still need to fulfill our organism's expectation of movement. It is the one way in which we know how to keep our joints healthy, how to keep all of our systems operating optimally, and that can be somewhat ambiguous for people. Joints are more, tangible for people because you can feel them when they're not happy, but we tend not to feel our heart when it's not happy until, it's fairly far along in terms of some sort of problematic process. So the point is, we're trying to conceptualize movement as more than just exercise, because that is crucial to somebody's health. And some people don't have time for structured exercise on a regular basis, but they still source a lot of movement into their days.
Yeah, exactly. It's in today's society, we're told that exercise is the thing that you need to do, and that's just because we don't get enough movement in our day-to-day life. And you can't rest your way to better health, I think is something that you've said. And that's because, we're obsessed with longevity and supplements and biohacking, and really we just need to let the body do what it's naturally meant to do. And so insourcing more movement is something that we've spoke about on the podcast before, and it's something that a lot of people, when they come to us they're looking for a movement plan, programming. Not only when they come to us, but in general, people are thinking, I need the plan that's going to get me to health. And so we always sit down with people and actually look at their actual life and say, okay, in your day-to-day, like, do you have an active job already, or do you have a sedentary job? And we try and figure out, if you're pretty sedentary in general, where have you outsourced all of your movement, and where can you actually bring some of that back in? Because if you're already somebody who's really busy and pressed for time, putting in an hour or two to get exercise is not reasonable for a lot of people. So when we can drip feed in more movement, whether that's working on how you commute to and from work, or how you commute to and from your errands, or spending time with your family, it's just trying to find moments in the day where you can actually get more, organic movement, so to speak, because that's going to bring up that baseline level of health, which is the ultimate goal. Because when you have that, then things like weight loss are going to come a little bit more easily, and that longevity piece that we tend to be really obsessed with, that we're trying to biohack with a lot of supplements and programs, will also come a little bit more easily.
Mm-hmm. I think that, it's also just one of those maintenance things. A lot of people, we've spoken about blue zones, a lot of people are quite obsessed with blue zones, and I think that there's a Netflix documentary, so even more people will be aware of them. Correct. Now. But one of the things is, if you go into those areas, they have a lot of inconvenience in terms of their environment. And so when it comes to sourcing movement and getting more of it in your life, you can look at your environment as a direct reflection of how much you will or will not get in without even thinking about it. So in our Western society, if you have a home that's, maybe you're in a condo building, you don't have stairs, like that immediately has influenced some of the movements you will not expose yourself to. Whereas if you go to some of the blue zones, they are in hillier areas. They have cobblestones throughout most of the city. They have a lot of stairs and like narrow spiral staircases. And granted, that poses accessibility issues. But if we're speaking about an able-bodied person that has to live in that environment for the duration of their life, they're getting a lot of movement just existing in their environment, just to like go get groceries, or to go to work, or to go for a walk. Like their walk is way more variable than here in Toronto, for example, where most of it is flat, or yes, we have hills here, but they're not, they're still pavement-based hills, or they're like nice packed gravel. So it is relatively convenient. And, especially when we look at things like the blue zones, there are a lot of people hyper-focused on where those centenarians are right now, meaning like what they're doing right in this moment in terms of what they're eating. But what you have to think about is that they just kept moving and existing within that environment their entire life, which means that they didn't lose certain capacities. Whereas unfortunately here, sometimes people lose capacities and they don't really know that they have until they're put into an environment like that. They go travel somewhere and realize, oh my gosh, I can't go up all these stairs that are like awkward heights, or I can't feel safe on cobblestones, like I feel like I'm going to fall, that kind of thing. And it exposes what we haven't had exposure to over here. And so that's partly why there is a bigger emphasis placed on exercise and the need for it here. But even then, you can look at that and think like, okay, well, what sort of exercise suits me? It doesn't all have to exist at a gym. So if I don't have anything within my environment that quite regularly challenges my balance skills, well, then maybe that's what I need to emphasize if I want to remove the risk of a fall when I go travel and hike, or even just like a risk of a fall here. We know people who've fallen here tripping up onto a curb, or like not seeing one of the many pylons that gets, like those little mini ones that get destroyed. They're perfect tripping hazards throughout the city of Toronto. And a lot of people think that that is something that older people have to worry about, and that's not true at all. We see that problem at all ages, and I'm going to throw you under the bus.
Yes, I love being under the bus.
Is Roche driving it?
Probably.
Anyway, like when we first started working together, we noticed that Dane, who, as everybody who's listened to this knows, was a high-level strongman athlete in the lightweight category, couldn't balance on one leg for more than like 8 seconds. So when we talk about balance and fall risk and all of that, we tend to think of aged populations, but from its basis, we've worked with a lot of strength athletes who, because of their sport, emphasize always being on 2 feet. And then as soon as you're on one foot and doing like a lunge or just trying to balance or balance with your eyes closed, you notice they're wobbling all over the place. And I've worked with a lot of runners who are the same way. And running technically is a one-legged sport in the sense that you're landing on one leg at a time. You should have good stability and endurance there and good balance there. But unfortunately, that's not always the way things go, and it can be part and parcel with why we see some sort of repetitive strain injuries coming up.
Yeah, and one of the questions that I really do like to ask people that I'm working with, or especially when I start working with them, is to challenge them about like what is their relationship with exertion, or what is their relationship with challenge? Because we do live in a world where we're constantly seeking more and more comfort. That's a natural thing for humans to do, and our world is built for that, and we're sold that we need that, whether that's in a new car or traveling, doesn't really matter. So there are people that I've worked with where their relationship with exertion is one of like finding an enjoyment and fun out of that, and those people get great results from incorporating new movements, new types of activity within their lifestyle. Other people who might identify as just, whenever I exert myself, it's like I don't like sweating. It's painful. It doesn't feel good. They have a really hard time sticking with any type of exercise regimen or insourcing more movement into their days. So a lot of this does come back to our identity, and we'll touch base on self in a little bit. But it's how do you identify with exerting yourself or doing something hard? Because doing hard things makes things in life easier. But avoiding hard things makes easy things in life hard. So it's a choice that we get to make in terms of how we identify with our physical output.
And it's a tricky balance too, right? Because we've met people who work intensely all the time, and their key opportunity with movement is actually learning how to navigate all the gears in between, which we've spoken about before. And so just to recap that analogy, it essentially means if you're always doing high intensity or max loads, really grinding it out, you're cranking on the highest gear of a bicycle, and you've forgotten about all of the other ones. So it does also mean that you are more prone to overtraining or to burnout or to repetitive strain injuries, and from lifting specifically, or running, or whatever not lifting, whatever your endeavor is that's creating that high intensity. And your opportunity is to learn how to fluctuate all the other gears to bring about some balance to that and to your system. And then I work with a lot of people with MSK, so musculoskeletal conditions, chronic conditions, injuries. And sometimes there's a fear of movement that comes in, rightfully so. Pain is a pretty big thing there, and fear often goes right alongside it in terms of preventing people from pushing into more challenging tasks. And again, with them, part of it is establishing parasympathetic states and reclaiming safety in movement. And that's generally done at very, very low, gentle intensities, drip feeding little movement tasks throughout someone's day, not really doing a workout per se. Even in the context of rehab, we always want to stay really shy of where someone's threshold of fatigue is. But that's only one stage. And to really reclaim freedom when we were talking about freedom, Dane was noticing just how much freedom having more mobility has given him over the years, and really having the freedom to move within your day-to-day, to not be afraid to lift that pot full of water, to not be afraid to take those awkwardly shaped stairs. That kind of thing is where we need to go from reclaiming safety and parasympathetic, calming states in your movement, to learning how to strategically challenge it. And you'll get like an adrenaline response. We usually find like heart rate goes up, temperature goes up. But also that is how we try to navigate getting into sympathetic states on purpose. So instead of being stuck in a sympathetic state, like an extreme of that would be fight or flight. Remember, this is a huge gradient. So it's not just one or the other. It's not like an off switch in our body. But if we've had a lot of MSK conditions and chronic pain or chronic conditions like COPD or otherwise, then we'll see that there is an apprehension towards stressing the body, and COPD is probably not a great example because we do need to be really careful with that one. But the other ones, like postural orthostatic tachycardia and even mast cell activation syndrome and EDS and Addison's, like all of these conditions, we need to figure out, okay, here's our parasympathetic, wow, let me try that word
Parasympathetic.
Again. Parasympathetic state. It's early. Tongue hasn't quite figured out how to work yet. These are our activities that bring us into that state, but also here's how we use movement strategically to be in a sympathetic state. That's also a way for us to dissipate stress. So we often think of a sympathetic state as something that's, causing stress, but not all stress is necessarily negative. Like you can think of this where if you're really angry, some people want to go on like a power walk, or they just want to go and punch a bag. Like that's a way for your body to process what it's feeling. And so in reclaiming movement and reclaiming sort of that freedom and that confidence and really the trust in your body means that you're not always stuck at either end of the spectrum of always doing things that are like super, super slow and calming, or always doing things that are crazy intense and like blasting your system. A lot of it is about figuring out like where are all of your gears, and then based on how your body feels that day, what are the ones that you need to play on. And granted, it can be a really slow process, especially if you're coming from rehab and chronic pain. But nevertheless, like there is a bit of a thrill for most people I've worked with when they get to challenge themselves and feel that like heart rate go up, and also feel safe when it goes up. So it is that state of arousal is usually where we associate those symptoms as being either ones that we don't want, like being uncomfortable with our heart rate and temperature going up, or the opposite, being uncomfortable or bored with it being too low.
And that's a really good kind of summary of like, we wanted to give people, like, how do you check in on this pillar of health? And that's a really good way to do that, is to ask yourself, how do I identify with movement and with challenge and with exertion? Where do I already spend most of my time? What would be a more appropriate counterbalance to that? That's a way that you can kind of check in to see like what stimulus you need, right? And at the end of the day, most people need to source more movement. That's, I think, the big takeaway. And the biggest question that you should ask yourself there is, what is the thing I will do most consistently? That is how you will get more movement in, is if you're thinking, I need that plan, that program, really take a step back and see, like, do you have time for a structured program in your life? If you do, fantastic. Find a coach, move forward, get the program that suits you. Great. But if not, if you're already that person that if you feel like you identify and you're very, very busy, you don't have much time, it's stressful thinking about how am I going to fit exercise in, then peel it back and just say, okay, where in my day can I get more movement? Can I walk from point A to point B instead of taking that car? Can I do something while, food is being prepared, or while food is even being delivered? Can I do something in that time? It's look for little pockets in the day where you can do something simple, because it's about the minimum effective dose, not the maximum effective dose.
Yeah, and, something as simple as a posture change goes a really long way. So instead of sitting on the couch at the end of a day, sat at your desk, even if you're doing structured exercise, we've met a lot of people who are in the gym like 5 days a week, but that's the only time they get movement. The rest of their day is like completely sedentary. We're just going to encourage you, for the sake of your joint health, to change your posture frequently. So sitting on the ground is a great way to encourage your body to continue changing posture. You can continue watching your TV show while you do that, but that immediately changes things. Maybe it's a book that you're reading that would actually sound great would be good in audio format. So you take a walk while you listen to it. So there are a lot of ways of just combining it. Again, go back to the environment comment. Our environment isn't necessarily structured in a way that encourages movement or inconveniences in terms of movement. And so if you can get creative that way and find things that automatically prompt you to do them, to Dane's point, be consistent with it, then it's really, really helpful, because it also requires less willpower every time. Like, you don't need to think, oh, okay, I got to go do this thing. So you can create little like triggers within your life. Like when I start this TV show, I spend the first 20 minutes of it on the ground. There you go. It becomes a habit. And to Dane's point, that is just what begets consistency. Before we move on to nutrition, what's the one thing that you feel has changed in your understanding of movement in the last 5 years?
In the last 5 years.
Since we established these pillars.
I think it is that it's that piece that we just spoke to about understanding your actual baseline, understanding who you are and how you live your life before choosing that output. Because that's where a lot of people can go wrong, is that they might already have a super active job and think they still need to go for 3 or 4 runs a day. It's a reminder that we all get older. And as we get older, again, life changes, but our body changes as well. So the rules of what we, quote unquote, need as that minimum effective dose changes quite a bit. And a lot of times it is the minimum effective dose is smaller. So it's just really understand who you are instead of listening to, whatever is out there in the social atmosphere or whatever we call it these days. You're listening to podcasts or reading blogs and just saying, this is the thing you have to do. You need X number of zone 2 cardio, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, no, understand who you are, how you live your life, and see what is your dosage that you need. So to me, it's really that individualized thing. As I get older, it's understanding how much that has changed, and it's kind of relaying that message to people.
Yeah, I think just changing the recipe on a regular basis, because we have found that we do a lot less structured strength training. It's very easy to just maintain our strength with a smaller dose, but we do a lot more aerobic training of different types, like through bodyweight movements, through longer walks, for me through cycling, actually you through little bursts of cycling. So the ratio of things changes, and we'll get to this in self. The less you get hooked in on just one way of doing things as being the perfect recipe, whether it's movement or nutrition or otherwise, the better you'll be able to react to what your body needs in that moment, and changing modalities or changing ratios.
Yeah, that's a really good point with the weight training, is that unless you're a competitive lifter in some way, shape, or form, the minimum effective dose for weight training for most people, especially if you've been a non-weight trainer your whole life and you're picking it up in your 30s or 40s, the minimum effective dose is very low. Like, it's a very low threshold to start with. So that's a really good takeaway as well. So while I think we could continue speaking about movement for an entire podcast, this is about all the pillars, so we should move on to the nutrition piece. And nutrition, I guess, what is nutrition? I like Freya wrote down this definition. Everything you put in your mouth, inclusive of how you consume it. So chewing, timing, stress state, that nature of things. And I think that's a really good jumping off point to speak about nutrition, because again, and now it's one of those blunt objects, the movement and the nutrition. I need the plan, I need the diet, I need this blunt object to smash my body into what I want it to become. But there's so much nuance to nutrition, inclusive of those little things that you just mentioned, Freya, the chewing, timing, stress state.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, with nutrition, the thing is, the way that we learned about it, or at least I learned about it in undergrad, was as this thing that we really didn't fully understand. But of course, there were recommended like daily allowances of certain things, and there were calculations to approximate how many calories somebody needed, and based on your anthropometrics, this is how much weight you should weigh within a range. So that's kind of what nutrition was. It was like checking off boxes for the caloric intake, the macronutrients, and a lot of it was sort of like a best guess at that point in time. We didn't really even understand what leptin and ghrelin was fully at that time. I mean, we still don't understand certain parts of the the pathway, but still, that is nevertheless how people still view nutrition, as if they can get this like perfect recipe of exactly, you know, we've got like macro veganism, we have carnivore diets, we have everything else in between, we have if it fits your macros still. So there are a lot of rules around it. We had blood typing, which I know we mentioned was a total hoax in a previous podcast. But the point is, we've always approached it as this like, this is the recipe and this is the magic thing. And nutrition, interestingly, we know now is influenced, the way in which we digest, sorry, not the nutrition, the way in which we digest is influenced by so many things beyond just like the macros or the calories in the food in front of you. So when you choose to eat influences how well you digest and process those foods and assimilate those nutrients. We also know the state in which you eat changes that as well. So a lot of people who eat on the go or in a stressed state or in a distracted state, they're like, I'm not stressed, but like they didn't actually really register all the mouthfuls they were taking because they were preoccupied with like work emails. In all of those states, we tend to find, okay, well, people have more bloat or they have more constipation or they have other sort of ailments. And what they'll first tackle is trying to do food elimination. They'll say, oh, I ate that thing. These are the symptoms I keep getting of bloat or abdominal cramping. Therefore, it must be that thing. I'm going to eliminate that. Instead of looking at the entire environment and context of the situation. Because if you're constantly eating distracted, we do so many things in a distracted fashion, driving distracted, eating distracted, and you're eating at a faster pace and you're not really taking the time to like process the fact that you are consuming food in this moment, then all of those things can create a lot of digestive distress. It can create weight fluctuations, either malabsorption, you lose a lot of weight, or otherwise. And it had nothing really to do with the food itself. It had everything to do with the context within which you were eating it, including your own psycho-emotional state.
Yeah, nutrition should be something that mitigates stress. It should be something that relieves stress and helps the body recover. Nowadays, meals and eating and nutrition often contribute to increased stress and inflammation. And that's a bit of a paradox just of our modern times. And just to your point, I have a client who I'm currentently working with, and I'm obviously not going to name names, but he's always had he's a pretty young guy, and he's always had GERD, or acid reflux. And I was speaking to him about how fast he eats, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I wolfed out my food." He's like, "I've never paid attention to that." I'm like, "Okay, just pay attention to that," because he's like, he's tried to go vegan, he's tried removing dairy, no coffee, no chocolate, acidic foods. I was like, "Okay, pay attention. Try and put down your utensils between bites. Just count your chews. Try and do that." Literally the first time he did that, he's like, "Wow, I didn't have acid reflux last night when I went to bed for the first time in weeks." Mm-hmm. Like, cool.
So there's something that this is sort of a principle, but like the simplest thing is often the truest. And in cases like that, it's like you can go so deep into all these different sorts of diets and like elimination things. And the simplest thing probably hasn't even been tried yet. We think of your digestive system as a whole and what gets it going. The first thing that gets it going is you seeing the food that you're consuming. Most of us can attest to the fact that we've looked at a thing and started like drooling a little bit, and maybe not drooling, but creating saliva inside our mouth, hopefully.
Homer Simpson and donuts.
Right? But like, it just goes to show that some of your digestive processes start to respond in accordance with you anticipating food. Like you cook a nice meal, and throughout that entire time, you're entirely focused on the preparation of it. And that alone is also preparing your body for the consumption consumption of it thereafter. And the simplest thing is often the truest. So many people will have been on all sorts of, in some cases even medications to try and resolve issues like GERD or persistent bloat or alternating between like really, really loose stools and really compacted ones. And nobody asked them how they chew. Nobody asked them how long it takes them to eat. No one asked them in which states they were eating. We've worked with a lot of people over the years. Like I can think of at least a dozen, and then I can also throw myself in the mix where our GI flared up when we, on days that we had to have like incredibly stressful meetings, work-related meetings, or with like really challenging relationships, whether it's like the partner that they were with or a work person that they, excuse me, or a like work colleague or anything like that. There was a situation that had nothing to do with the food that was causing it. But if those don't even get tackled, if we don't even draw attention to them, then you can wind up down these rabbit holes of like really extreme diets of like, all I'm going to eat are legumes, or all I'm going to eat is, stuff that has 0 XYZ in it, which becomes very hard to avoid. And
I'm going to go on a cleanse, which
or
is
cleanses,
which the opposite of what is going to make your body feel great.
Yeah, cleanses are a whole other ballgame. Again, it's like the weight loss industry is sadly enmeshed with nutrition. So a lot of people see those two things as synonymous, and they're not, but that is how marketing has always portrayed it. And they've always pitched it as like, this is a weight loss thing and it's super healthy for you. And cleanses fall into that as well, but so do a lot of other things. Essentially, a lot of things that cause people to poop a lot convinces them that they're cleaning themselves out. And sadly, that's not the way it goes, and we're still learning a lot about the gut microbiome, but, harsh laxatives are not helpful. Obviously, there are certain medical situations in which case that is warranted, but we're talking about people buying, like, wild rose off the shelf and cleaning themselves out in that sense. It's not necessarily a healthy way. And our body, again, it kind of goes back to the movement thing too, where like our biology is magic. If we tap into the expectations and the needs of our biology, really great things can happen. And I understand it sounds really simple. Applying it can be very challenging, depending on like where you live and depending on the environment within which you live, what you have access to, and so on. But with that in mind, trying to make decisions that do tap into your biology's like inherent expectations and needs tends to be easier. So one of the needs we generally had was properly chewing food, right? Because we didn't have these hyperpalatable things, which everybody knows about. Because that also has been popularized. Like we were talking about McDonald's the other day and how the bread is just like, it kind of just like melts. Whereas if you have a burger that you've made at home with like bread from a local bakery or buns from a local bakery and, some higher quality ingredients, like biting into that burger is actually a little bit more difficult to try to get all the things in one place, not squirt out the back end. But that's just a prime example of like, if we make things hyper palatable and soft, it takes very little chewing, which is how people can wolf things down. You can certainly do that with things that do require more chewing, with different effects. But a lot of foods out there are designed to be really easy to consume. And then of course we have like stories of Silicon Valley people who are blending all their food into a smoothie, and people are praising them for the grind and for just getting the bare necessities down. And I'm kind of like, okay, well, we can't say that, sure, maybe what they're creating is great, but that will have a consequence. Like maybe not right today or tomorrow, but there is no way that will not have a consequence down the line.
Yeah, two things I just want to touch base on that you just said. And one is, it's a pretty good rule of thumb that if the majority of the food you eat doesn't require teeth, you might want to make a few changes. And this is not to be biased against people who don't have teeth, but it's a good filter actually now that I think about it. If all your food is like gummy and easy to just swallow without chewing, might want to get something with a little bit more fiber in there. And the second part is the grind piece that you just mentioned. And if everything you're doing with nutrition is just to allow yourself to grind more, health is going to suffer at some point. You can't constantly grind. You need counterbalance. Counterbalance is what enables our body to thrive all the time. You can't constantly be grinding. So yeah, you get 20-something-year-old guys in Silicon Valley who are grinding. Cool, you can do that at that age, no problem, and get away with it. Most people in life with kids and jobs and stuff like that, you need counterbalance to all the things that cause stress in your life. So just wanted to touch base on those two things. And also just to mention, I think one of the things that has really, again, if we go back to the best 6 years, 5-6 years, things that I've learned about nutrition, one of the main things for people is that unfamiliarity feels wrong. And things that feel familiar feel safe. So when it comes to nutrition choices and changing our behaviors around nutrition, the reason it's so hard to make a lasting change is because the things we've always done, whether they're helpful or not, they feel safe to us. They feel right to us because we've always done them. And those are usually the things that are holding us back from our health goals or our, weight loss goals. Kind of go in that same bucket for a lot of people. That's what they're chasing, but they ultimately want to feel better in their body. And a lot of times that is the weight loss is what they chase. But the things that bring us comfort are often things that hold us in the place that we've existed for so long. So this dials it back to the same thing I mentioned about movement. And it's, what is your relationship with, in this case, uncertainty or discomfort, something that feels different? Because with nutrition, you often have to do the opposite. If what you've been doing from a nutrition perspective hasn't worked over the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years, this is where you have to check in on what are those things I have been doing chronically that might bring me comfort in one way, but are probably the things that are holding me back in another way. And finding a way to embrace that newness, that unfamiliarity, because that's often the thing that's going to bring you to that new place, which is, again, change is scary. It's somewhere you haven't been. So you have to latch on to that and be willing to go to that place that doesn't feel right because you don't know it. But when you get there, that's when it can feel right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, change is scary sometimes, especially when it comes to food. And one of the interesting things about even research and how a lot of people point the finger at researchers saying, oh, you're not including a lot of females in your trials. When it comes to nutrition, a lot of females don't want to be in those trials. So I'm not excusing anybody in this. I'm saying it's a mixed bag, because as soon as you're running a trial where you're asking females to change what they eat, and they don't know if that will result in weight gain or weight loss. Obviously, ethically, they're never going to do something that makes they're not going to ask participants to eat stuff that will legitimately make them unhealthy. That's not how those things work. But a lot of females are hesitant to have someone else change their food. And so, and they find that that's just not as consistent with males, which is why I'm highlighting that it's often female. So sometimes it can be hard, which I think just highlights the fact that weight has been such a contentious issue for a really, really long time. It's been equated with health. The weight loss industry is worth billions of dollars. And so it has all amounted to this fear around what we put in our mouths. Which goes right back to Dane's point about feeling safe. And, I've seen this expression with people who are handling a lot of different things like allergies and pain and sleep issues. And sometimes changing food can help that, right? So if you pull your meals away from bedtime and you start eating earlier in the day, it can definitely help sleep. And we know that sleep can help pain. So that's how nutrition can fit into that picture. It has nothing to do with somebody's weight. But having somebody change a pattern like that can sometimes feel scary because they're afraid that something that they already are familiar with that maybe isn't comfortable, but they're familiar with it, will change. And so not knowing what's ahead of you, even if that thing is ultimately better, not knowing what's ahead of you can feel scary enough to hold you back, because you feel safe ironically, even in your current discomfort. So anyway, it is one of those things where we found a lot of people were fasting. We fasted. We tried it out for years. More and more research keeps coming out. It's one of those things where if you've always been eating late in the day and you have high anxiety, you've got some digestive issues, a lot of people will just keep pushing that meal even later, thinking more is better, when really you might need to flip the script and eat earlier, even though that'll feel weird at first or scary at first, to reclaim safety in essentially, I think it boils down to variety. So we talked about claiming safety in movement, and the whole idea is you're trying to go away from this tight little circle that's the recipe of I can do these 3 things or these 10 things and I can eat these 15 things and this is what keeps me safe, to just grow your range of tolerance and grow your safety. The key thing is feeling safe, having more variety in your life in a multitude of ways when it comes to choices around movement and around nutrition and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that comment right there really I had this realization the other day, and I've worked with people for nutrition for over a decade now, and I can't remember, or maybe it's never happened, that somebody's come to me for help with nutrition and there's somebody who already gets up in the morning and has a big, calm, nutritious breakfast. Those people never reach out for nutrition help. It's people who skip breakfast or who rush through their mornings. That is the most common thread among people who reach out for nutrition coaching, whether that's for health or weight loss or otherwise. It's really fascinating. I know that's anecdotal, it's correlation perhaps, but dials it back to, again, if we give people a point to check in on with this, is with your nutrition. If you feel like your nutrition is not serving you, what have you been doing chronically for the longest time? What are the things that you do most frequently? Because even if those things bring you comfort, it's very possible those are the things that need to change, because comfort does not equate to rightness. So that's a good point to check in on in nutrition. And that actually segues us really nicely into self, right? Self-care is, these are things I do for self-care often. So sense of self is a very important pillar, because knowing oneself and our values and our purpose and our identity is what gives us ownership over our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when we say self as our pillar, it doesn't actually mean self-care. That can be a component of it. Self is you, yourself, your sense of yourself.
Yes.
And as Dane said, your identity and your own ownership over your life. And your values and your identity will all kind of push you to make decisions in a certain way, whether you're acutely aware of what those are or not. And, if we could loop this back into movement and nutrition, somebody who identifies as a person who does a certain type of exercise, and identifies as a diet, I am and same thing with movement, I am and insert here, a lot of their decisions around those things and around what they do with themselves will be sort of guided by the fact that they identify as those things. And that's just an example of it. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's detrimental. It just means that that's something that helps you make decisions in your life. So if you identify as a runner, and somebody invites you on a trip that has these guided running tours every day in a city, you'd be like, yeah, I'm a runner. That sounds like a great way for me to travel. Some runners would not say that. But the point there is just it's not just the fact that you can do it physically. The identification as that might drive you to make decisions like that a little bit more often.
Yes, true.
That was terrible. We're going to cut that.
Probably not. I like it when we keep these things in. But yeah, the sense of self is, a lot of people who come to work with us, they don't quite hear themselves say it, but it's, I am busy. I am stressed. these are things that they don't necessarily feel that if they were asked, how do you identify the kind of person of you? They wouldn't say those things, but those are the messages or the things that they think and feel most often throughout their days. So in a way, those are like that's who you become when you're constantly thinking, I don't have time for it. It's constantly being reactive rather than being proactive. And that sense of self is taking the time to understand what's important. So if something is not going well for you, this is kind of the takeaway that I've learned over the past 5 years is doing your personal work. And it's something that I never really thought I needed until I met Freya. Another conversation we were having last night where I thought I had it all, I knew it all, everything was going great. But actually taking a few minutes every day to sit with myself and be like, okay, remind myself, what kind of person am I? How do I want to go through today? Do I want to be someone who is reacting to everything that's thrown at me? Or am I going to go into the day with a certain mantra of, whatever it is, kindness or calm or patience, and trying to just be that person through all of our daily things? Because if we don't do that, if we don't actually think about who we are and how we want to represent ourselves, we end up being reactive, and whatever the world throws at us, whatever comes out is, again, it's just a reaction rather than who we actually are. I'm not sure if I explained that well, but that's how I feel.
Well, and that's just been part of your own process with it. And, just with the patience and the calm comment, I will say I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum. Sometimes I'm too calm at a point in time when I probably could have been a little bit more firm about something really not being okay. Whether that was through interaction with another human or something like that. And so it is, to your point, it's more about knowing what makes you tick. And it doesn't you don't have to meditate for 45 minutes to figure that out. But for some people, that will help them figure that out. For other people, it's something completely different, like doing brain dumps at night and seeing based on, brain dumps are just really, really short form, bullet point journals. So it's not actually journaling about a story, it's more bullet points. And there are a bunch of different questions that you can use in a brain dump that can be helpful, but sometimes you start to see your own pattern of what's making you tick. Sometimes it's taking leadership courses or reading books about it to realize, oh my gosh, that's what makes me really driven in this way. These are my values. I thought they were here, but actually turns out they're over here, and that's okay. And of course they also evolve over time, but it is having that sort of wherewithal of what makes you tick, what helps you make decisions, what helps you navigate change. All of that, if you have a good sense of self, that helps you handle all those things that comes your way, that come your way throughout life. Whereas if you feel like it's always external factors and you maybe don't feel like you have a solid sense of self, you might have more sort of dissonance in some of the things that you do, or you might have more frustration and realize I don't want to be frustrated with that friend, but I keep saying yes to doing activities that I really don't want to do. And I'm not being honest about that. It can be as simple as that, of I keep saying, yes, I'll go bowling with them every Friday, but I really don't like bowling. It doesn't have to be this big, here's my purpose and my values and this giant thing. It's the little things, which I call the little big things. It's the little decisions. You said yes to coffee at 3 p.m., even though you know that that'll keep you up all night because you were afraid to ask for a different type of drink like water or tea. It's the little big things.
Exactly. And that's, to me, having a good sense of self is taking responsibility and taking ownership for your choices and decision, right? Because as you say, Freya.
As I always say, choices were made. And, I find even when there's a lot of stress, like we said, not all stress is bad. Some of it probably not great, but others, fine. It's a normal part of life, I would say. And I always remind myself if there is a lot of stress, I say choices were made. I took on a lot of stuff in the last 18 months. And anytime it felt like I had no idea how I was going to get it all done, I would remind myself that choices were made. And it's true. I had the privilege and opportunity to make those choices, and I fully own that. I'm not trying to deny that I feel stressed in that moment, but there is a certain kind of piece of being like, okay, well, this is the choice I made. This is the consequence right at this moment. Now, what are the choices that I can make to handle these current consequences of maybe needing to like work a little later? How am I going to recalibrate from that? And I think that that's a really important part of the overall process, is understanding where we've had choice, because every choice has a consequence. But not all consequences are negative, which is the part where people, I think it's because we learn the word consequence when we're children, when we're doing something bad and parents are like, you're going to have a consequence. But not all consequences are bad. Like, I chose to have water. The consequence is that I'm hydrated. Great. Simple, small, but every choice has a consequence, and we have to recognize that we do have choice, because sometimes people don't realize that, and then when they do and they start exercising those small choices consciously, even if there are only 2 that you could possibly make, and they're not ideal, a lot of the things that you have going on are not in your control. You just have to take account of the things that you can influence change with, or influence consequences with in that moment. And I find that there's a certain amount of peace with that. So even when things are a little crazy and it's chaotic, it's like, okay, well, choices were made. So what choice am I going to make right now, or what choices will I make right now to help me handle it and move forward?
So as a takeaway for this sense of self part of the podcast, just to touch base on the dissonance and the stuff you felt. So if you're somebody who feels unhappy with themselves more often than not, from time to time, however often that may be, it's to take the time to accept where you are, the circumstance that you're in right now, accept that this is it, choices have been made, and forget about the blame, whether you blame yourself or blame an external factor or whatever. It's accepting where you are and saying, cool, this is where I am. Now moving forward, I get to choose. I can make a choice. If the choices I've been making don't jive with who I am, I've been feeling dissonance because I've been saying yes to some stuff that's not great, or no to things that maybe I know I should approach, know that you now get the choice. The future is a blank slate. So accept where you're at, absolve the blame, forget that, move forward with kindness to yourself and with optimism to say, hey, I can make a new choice. I can go this way. This is how I know these haven't been working for me as choices. Trying the new thing. And again, it goes back to that whole embracing discomfort a little bit, because it might be difficult. But when you know you do have, not accountability, that you do have control over your choices, the future looks a lot brighter, I guess, just in general. Yeah?
Yeah. I'm like, did you lose your train of thought there?
I don't know. There were birds outside just fluttering around. I think I got the point across,
You're like, yeah, life's good.
Life can be better. But it's true. Just doing honor to yourself. That's really what it comes down to, and knowing that there are external factors that always play on us, but we ultimately do have agency, is the word I was looking for, not accountability, over what we do moving forward.
Yeah. We try our best within the constraints within our lives. So moving from ourself into community, community is our 4th pillar here. Community is fairly self-explanatory in terms of what it is. And why it's important, I think, has been really highlighted in the last few years because of COVID. A lot of people lost connection with the communities that they were a part of, and lost that sort of a lot of people became very isolated. And it doesn't take a lot to create a community. You don't need a massive group of people to feel like you're part of something. Just having contact with a few close people can be really, really helpful. And COVID caused a lot of loneliness where individuals could not communicate or be in touch with in the same room, be in touch with their close group of family members or friends or just people in their neighborhood. They couldn't have all of those like little connections throughout their day that we maybe don't realize comprises our community. It's like going, say you're somebody who goes to a coffee shop every day, like that barista knows your name, and that might be part of your community. It's just a touch point that makes you feel like you're part of a bigger group. And one of the biggest issues here I think I saw was just that all the various group classes, we're talking about like aquafit and outdoor sports, or some of the programs for adults with mobility challenges, and all the programs for kids and teens, like all these programs just had to come to a screeching halt. And I think that we're still very much reeling from that. I feel like we're going to learn a lot more about the implications of that down the line, because obviously everybody meeting on Zoom to do these things is not the same at all. And so within community, it can be the people that you don't really know, but that you see regularly, that you say hi to. We have neighbors in our building that we know a little bit about them, but like they are part of our community. And then there are people in the neighborhood that we'll see. They're part of like our auxiliary community. Like it's more just a hello. And that alone can help a lot of people feel more like they belong, less like they're on an island on their own. And then of course you go in from that to the people that you would share your fears with and your deep like hopes and dreams, that kind of thing. So community is pretty expansive. And like I said, we don't need a ton of like super close people, but having a couple people that we can really be connected with, and then having other people in our environment that we feel like we can say hello to is huge. And there was that sort of animosity that came about with the distancing, in the sense that people like wouldn't even look at each other on the street. And it's like, okay, you could be distanced, but like still say hello. And so I think a lot of it is reclaiming that post-pandemic, because there's a lot of like angst and fear and aggression, and people don't necessarily realize that those are the emotions that they're handling right now. And so we find that like just a simple little hello and a smile, some people completely avoid eye contact, want nothing to do with us. Phones don't help with that. But it makes a world of difference in terms of our physiology. Like our physiology responds well to a smile. It's why a smile is universally recognized. Disgust is not. Anger isn't even really universally recognized, but smiling is universally recognized. And, it may sound cheesy, but again, like feeling loneliness versus alone and community is complex, but one of the simplest things is a smile.
Mm-hmm. One of the biggest reasons I love mornings, and especially going outside in the mornings, is because in the mornings you will see the best of people. People out walking their dogs, or just going out to grab a coffee, or just trying to get some sun, and people will make eye contact and smile and say hello in the mornings. It's a far more common thing to see. Whereas if you're never up in the mornings, for example, and you go out at night all the time, that's when you see the worst of people. People are drunk. People are, stumbling around if you go downtown.
Or they're afraid.
But they're afraid, exactly. The head's down, in the phone, got places to go. It's just rush, 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 rush. It's a completely different environment to put yourself into, which is why mornings are really magic when it comes to health, for a variety of reasons, and that's only one of them. And then to touch base on another thing that you mentioned, Freya, like even before the pandemic, our phones were making us, more lonely. They claim to make us more connected. Ultimately, phones are making us lonelier and lonelier. They're giving us, that we have phones, we can bail on its social plans anytime we want. It's normal. And the pandemic then came in and just made it all that much worse. And we are still totally reeling from that. So having a strong sense of self that we just talked about is so crucial for health, to avoid that internal dissonance that we can feel every day. Because when we feel like we're not acting in ways that match up with our values and our integrity, that will cause this chronic stress, and that will cause chronic disease over time. Community, on that flip side, is basically how you can have a community to support your strong sense of self. So finding that community where you find like-minded people that really vibe with you, having support from others to say, yeah, like, this is you, this is the self that you have and the person you are. And now you found people to say, yeah, that person is great. Like, keep being that person. It brings that whole picture together. And that is what brings up that deep health. It's one of the reasons I do love the gym, and I'll shout out to Fortis Fitness right here. The morning crew, I'm there most days, 6:30, 7. And the morning crew there, they're just so supportive. There's so many great people there who didn't know each other before they showed up at the gym. They started going to the gym probably because they had their own fitness goals. But there's no doubt in my mind that people continue to go to the gym because it's the community. They want to see their people. They want to have those morning conversations. It's a beautiful way for them to start their day. And when you can find something like that, it doesn't have to be the gym. It can be, like I said, going to the local coffee shop, anything like that. But finding a community that you feel really does support who you are, it makes all the difference in terms of longevity and quality of life. And there is research to back that up as well. So.
And, in terms of our own personal understanding, I think we've already touched on how it has changed, and a lot of it has changed because of the vantage point that we got from the pandemic of removing community. We saw how negatively people were impacted, and we have friends all over the globe and across our country where restrictions were very different. We saw the impacts change based on that. And, in terms of getting more of it, it doesn't have to be this big, complex thing, even though as an adult, I know that making friends and meeting new people can be trickier than, as a kid. That has its own challenges, but you are put into a school where it's like, okay, make friends, off you go. And as an adult, we've found a lot of our clients, like, in encouraging them to, reclaim some community after all of the closures, like, really left everybody isolated to their home. Sometimes it's picking up a new sort of thing, whether this is a big one that we know so many people who've picked this up, is pickleball. We know so many people, but like Dane was touching on, people who really resonate with you in the same kind of, they might be just the same sort of like ideologies or morals or whatnot, or interests in terms of what you love to talk about. Those might be more like your close friends. But when it comes to taking part in sort of a team or a partnered sport, that can be huge as far as community. And so that's why I think pickleball has been so successful, is because you don't need a high level of skill to go into it. You didn't need to start when you were like 3 or 4 years old to be relatively proficient with it. And people are generally really supportive in that environment, which is fantastic. And you can get there are more courts for pickleball than there are like squash courts where you need membership at a club, and it's this whole thing. And, we see this in all sorts of other things. We were noticing that softball leagues are back at the park near us, which is fantastic. When we were swimming at the YMCA just down the street a few times a week, we would always go in. The timing that we happened to be going at was in line with aquafit classes. We'd see the same people in the change rooms each time, which is wonderful. Like, their conversations are naturally occurring there. That might be the only time they quote unquote hang out, but it's huge as far as having community. And more importantly, people notice when someone's missing, and that gives a sense of belonging as well, to be like, oh, where were you last week? We missed you there, that kind of thing. So it doesn't have to be huge, but there are like book clubs out there that are more open. There are new hobbies that you can take on. There are walking groups that you can join in on. And it can take a little bit of a self push sometimes to take on something new like that. But at this particular point in time, it can be incredibly helpful, just based on what your own interests are, or maybe try something that you think you'll be really bad at and see what happens. You might be surprised. We've had a lot of clients that we've encouraged to do things that they didn't think they were inherently good at, meaning, oh, no, I'm not athletic, I'm not going to try that. It's like, give it a shot. You've never actually given yourself the opportunity to be athletic, and that's not a blame thing. That's like, unfortunately, when we were kids, if you were either labeled as like athletic or you have an athletic potential versus people who are labeled as not having that, which is not fair or correct. But then we see a lot of kids in the teen years, because they no longer have to be part of like gym sports, they just self-select themselves out because they feel like they're not good at it. So there are a ton of things out there that you can sort of explore that are available to all ages now. And we just see, like, we see everybody at the park cheering and like applauding, and you see all different ages, all different body types. Like that is accomplishing so many things all at once, not just community.
And there's that being uncomfortable thing again, right? It comes back to try something you might not be good at. Put yourself out there, join a community. You don't have to be good at it. It's finding people to have fun with and just to accept, right? And so if we want to just wrap this up and give it another little takeaway, it can just be that kind of asking yourself that question, like, am I feeling accepted in day-to-day life? Do I feel loved unconditionally? If you're feeling there might be a gap there, look at who you're spending the majority of your time with. Are these people who are building you up and supporting you, or are you maybe spending a bit too much time with people who cut you down and don't really honor your true sense of self? Because when you can spend more time with people who are, like I said, like-minded, or just they love you unconditionally, just accept you for who you are, that support is what's going to lead to long-term health.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I started tripping over my own tongue there a little bit too.
I heard.
We've been going on a while here,
That's
so
okay.
we've got one more pillar, and that is stillness. So we started with movement, we're ending with stillness, and the last time we did a podcast about this, I was like, this is my favorite pillar, which then was kind of funny, and I centered that around because I realized I love to sleep now, and that was really the main reason. I think my love for stillness has grown since then for another reason, but stillness can really be distilled down into kind of recovery for the both mental and physical. And sleep is definitely one of them, but there's more to stillness than just sleep.
Stillness is definitely like sleep is one of them, one of the ways in which we achieve stillness, of course. But having stillness while you're still conscious throughout your day is equally important. And this is something that I think in 2019, my word of that year was trying to find stillness in my life, because I was the I am busy person for way too many years, and I didn't complain about it, but it was definitely having a really strong negative influence on my health in particular. And so stillness is something, for someone it might be meditation. That's usually, like, people will usually guess that stillness is meditation or sleep, right? But it's not just that. It's like giving yourself mental and physical rest, and you might be doing that by reading like a fiction book. You might be doing that by journaling. You might doodle. You might actually paint or draw. I know that there is some movement associated with that, but the whole point is that you're able to just like tap into sort of an open mental state, and or perhaps a lightly like creative state. And not always being busy doing stuff is really hard for a lot of people. Every minute of the day has to be accounted for. And given our industry, we're obviously in careers where like you're so acutely aware of the hour, because your sessions are an hour, and then if you have paperwork, like or charting, that's like a specific time. And so breaking away from that like constant monitoring of the clock is hard, but it also incredibly necessary, because stillness is just so fundamental to who we are. We're not supposed to be grinding all day from the moment we get up to the moment we crash at night. And some people think, oh, well, I do lounge, and so technically that is stillness, but they're scrolling on their phones most of the time. That's heavy mental work. Even if you're just like scrolling, I don't know, one of the apps like TikTok or Instagram, there's a lot of mental processing going on with all of the rapid fire, the rapid fire information you're taking in, even if it's completely useless. Like a duck made friends with a turtle, and then I don't know, a piglet walked in.
Okay, this is important content though, Freya.
It is, but even then, it's still mental, like a lot more mental work than we really need to be taking part in that moment if we're trying to achieve stillness. And that's it's a hard thing for some people, myself included. There's always something to do. There's always a to-do list, you know? Mm-hmm. That's part of it.
And then, yes, there is sleep on top of that. And again, I love sleep. Sleep is a thing where some people, again, this comes down to identity in a lot of places. A lot of people identify as being a bad sleeper. Some people identify as being a good sleeper. And while there's truth to a lot of those things, trying to find peace with, if you've had a history of not being a great sleeper, also just being horizontal and resting is still extremely restorative in a lot of ways. And coming to peace with that is very important for a lot of people. You had something to say on that?
Yeah, and not looking at your phone. Like, lie in bed and just, like, allow yourself to be there. And I'm speaking as somebody who is always working on sleep. Like, I have to practice it. I've learned how to be better at it. I've learned how to get through, the impulse to just give up at 2 a.m. and go start doing work because, like, I can't fall asleep again. It does take work. It does take practice. You do have to actively work on helping your body feel safe. Reading before sleep is one of the most powerful sleep aids in my experience. Being on your phone is one of the most powerful wakeful things. So if you're reading on your phone and then you're crashing, or you're watching TV and falling asleep to it, and then you complain about being a light sleeper, those things are contributing to it. And maybe 6 years ago I would have hesitated to say that, but, like, hands down, those are contributing to it.
Yeah, and if you, again, go on the internet, everyone's going to talk about light, blue light, all this kind of stuff before bed. The content of what you're consuming and what you're doing before bed is a far bigger concern than the light. And I'm not saying blast bright lights, but the content is far more important for your nervous system in terms of how your brain and your body are going to be able to shut down before going to sleep. One of my favorite things about stillness is kind of combining stillness and sense of self, starting my days with, even if it's just 5 minutes, to sit and try and just repeat a mantra, call it meditation, whatever it is, but just a mantra for the day, and just to check in again on my sense of self and to be still. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak.
Or feed 2 birds with 1
or
crumb. Or
feed, if we're going to be very kind, which is one of my mantras a lot of the time. And so, yeah, a good takeaway for stillness, I think, is, again, check in on how are you identifying. Are you like, I'm a bad sleeper, or like, oh, no, I can't meditate, I'm a bad meditator, I can't do this. Is remember, hard things make life easier. So if it's something you're not comfortable with or you identify in that way, look into has that mentality and that mindset been helpful for you? And try the thing that might be a little bit more uncomfortable and see if that can bring you a little bit more ease through your day and maybe even a little bit better sleep at night.
It's practice. It's really, all of these things are practice. Yeah. And that practice is making choices, is doing a new thing more than once before pronouncing it as a failure. It's, finding your own way in terms of what you need to make yourself comfortable. When I try something new, I need to, like, mentally rehearse it for a few days first, whereas other people are comfortable just diving in, and that both of those things are okay. That's where knowing yourself can help you with all of the other pieces of what will make you more successful. And I've shared this before, but, like, meditating first thing in the morning, not a good thing for me. I will fall back asleep, I have found. Or I'll just feel so fidgety because I've already been, like, awake for a little bit in bed and just, like, resting there. I'm so fidgety that, like, I don't really, like, my brain is in my emails already, even though I haven't opened them yet. And so I found that for me, midday, taking 20 minutes to just be, whether I am, like, formally meditating or just not doing work, like, on purpose, that's more my time to sort of help myself recalibrate and check in. I lie on the ground because that tends to help my back. That's my time to create a little bit of stillness. And then again in the evening. So you just need to find, like, what makes sense for you. Don't listen to anyone on the internet telling you that the 5 key habits to the perfect human life is to start your day this way and to do this. Like, it just discounts everybody's experience and rhythms being a little different. And it I think, imposes a lot of like, this is the good way and what you're doing is the bad way. And quite frankly, I'm never going to let a stranger online who's never met me say that there's like one way for all humans to do things, because that's clearly a person who's never worked with other humans.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's as good a place as any to wrap this up, Freya. You touched base on a lot of good stuff right there, but I think the big takeaway is that there is no one recipe for anyone. These are the 5 pillars that we've selected because for both ourselves and in our working careers, we find that when people focus on these 5 areas, it does tend to bring very good results. And I think the message that I heard myself repeating a lot of times is figure out what have you been doing most chronically, and that is the thing that maybe that's the focus, to find that new place of a little bit of discomfort, something that a little bit new to you, and that can help, shift the tide a little bit for you.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the idea behind all of these is to create more ease. When these are all lined up, when you've checked in with all these pillars, we find that people have more freedom and more ease in their life. So even if changing it is a little bit hard, as Dane said, the goal isn't to have it be hard all the time. It is to create more ease and more freedom in other facets of life. So with that said, as always, you can visit us online and check out our articles, because we will have more coming out very soon over the next 8 months as well. And we look forward to seeing you through the rest of this season.
Absolutely. So once again, I'm Dane Wallace with Freya Spence on the Move Daily Health Podcast, and we will be in touch soon.